6 max, 100 big blinds, button versus big blind, 3-bet pot. What is the average continuation bet frequency on queen high flops? Or on paired queen high flops? Or on rainbow paired queen high flops? Or for top pair hands on rainbow paired queen high flops? Hello everyone and welcome to the new video. I'm excited to share with you the results of my work over the last several months. I would like to show you how to answer the questions from the intro and other similar questions in just seconds with the new flop aggregation reports. We already had some aggregation reports since PioSolver 1. The way it works is that we have some spot calculated over several flops. We read those files one by one and save this data to memory. Then we calculate some averages, some aggregates, and create a report file. In the new reports, we also start by reading all the files. However, we speeded up that part a little bit. But then we don't create the visual or textual report immediately, but write all the gathered data to a single file that can be later opened in the viewer. When we do that, we can aggregate by board texture, aggregate by hand categories, or we can filter down the results to only some boards, or only some hand categories. Let's look how it works in PioViewer. First, we have to load a tree from a spot that we have calculated over several flops, like in many other PioViewer features. Then we go to Tools, V3 Flop Aggregation, Create. First, we have to select which nodes to export. We will be able to see the aggregate results only for the nodes which we select here. To begin with, I suggest selecting all the nodes and only cut it down if you are going to have a lot of reports and not enough disk space. Then we have to select the flop subset and weights. Those weights are later used to calculate global averages. When you have a spot that you have computed over some smaller subset of flops, it's recommended to select the weights for flops which you have used to calculate this spot. If you have solved all 1755 flops, select the first option here. More options below can be used to save some megabytes when exporting the reports. Again, I suggest to export everything until you gain more experience. Next, we have to come up with a name for our report, specify a file name, and click Generate Report. Once the report is done, we can open it directly from the Generate window, or we can go to Tools, V3 Flop Aggregation Viewer, and load a file from there. Once the report is open, we have to select a node, and let's quickly try to reproduce the results from the introduction. So, queen high flops. Let's exclude queen-queen from the average. Let's leave only paired boards, only rainbow, and let's narrow down to top pair only and see the aggregation again. And now, let's look more closely into what do we have in this feature. So let me clear all the filters. So the central point of this feature is this grid. It shows average strategies across all boards grouped according to some criterion. Let's look what are these criteria. We've got grouping by high cards. We can group all boards together or split them by a number of high cards, all the way down to individual boards. We can group the boards based on board textures, like suitedness or connectedness. We can click any group to quickly reduce the analysis to only this group of boards. We can now switch to the hand categories and see the average strategy grouped by different hand categories. And as in this other view, we can split the hands using several criteria: hand strength, draws, equity or EV buckets, or combine any number of those. We can also filter out the selection to only some group of hands. Now, we can go back to grouping by board texture and see the average strategies only for the selected hand group. Now, we can go, for example, to the raw data to see the individual combos in our group on different boards. So now, let's go back to the analysis view and see what other features we are missing. First of all, we can show more columns. We can show the equity, EV, or frequencies. For example, sorting by equity tells us which boards are favoring which range. And sorting by EV shows us which boards are really favoring which player. Frequencies tell us how often certain rows appear and are the most interesting when combined with hand categories or other filters. The relative frequencies of rows can also be seen in the strategy columns when we select scaled bars. Advanced text filters can be used to collect some interesting statistics. For example, let's filter hands for ace-king which missed the board. So the condition for that will be ace-king and ace-high and no draw. We can now see on which boards ace-king is still a great hand and on which not, but also on which boards we should continue betting anyways. One nice way to visualize that would be to select copy sheet to clipboard and make a graph from it. For example, I quickly built this little tool, but there are plenty of tools like that on the internet. We can paste our report from the application and display, for example, the relation between our equity and betting frequency. What we can see on the graph is that we have boards where our ace-king has high equity and we should bet nearly 100%, like trip boards and low paired boards. There is a group of boards where we should never bet, and it seems to be mostly monotone boards. But we have some interesting outliers. For example, we have some boards where ace-king has relatively high equity, but we should still not bet it. And it seems to be jack-jack low. And on the other end of spectrum, we have boards that have relatively low equity, but we should bet ace-king fair amount of time anyways. Jack 9-8 or Jack 9-7 rainbow. Let's try another example. Let's filter to boards with king or queen high and two small unpaired cards. Using filter, it will be king to queen, 9 and less, and then X. Let's see how top pair no draw fares on those boards. We can view in the viewer or export and make some charts. And interestingly, we see few clusters of boards. We have monotone boards, which are bad for ace-king. We have a small cluster of exactly queen 9-8, which I find interesting. And then we have very visible clusters of boards with and without a flush draw. And we see some clear tendencies in those clusters. For example, in the flushed draw boards cluster, it looks like our top pair is the strongest on small disconnected boards. The stronger our top pair is, the less often we have to bet it, suggesting that protection of our hand is the major contributor to betting our top pairs on those boards. We can observe exactly the same in the viewer. We can see how visible are the differences in average strategies and EVs when we select different grouping criteria. For example, if we group by a high card, we can see that on king high boards, our top pair is slightly stronger, wins considerably more on average, and bets slightly less. But the differences aren't huge. When we split by suitedness, we see very clearly that the monotone boards stand out, and the suited and rainbow boards have considerable differences. If we group by both high card and suitedness, we see that the results cluster around suitedness more than they cluster around high card. Let's remove the monotone boards from the picture. If we group boards by connectedness, then the effect is small, but there is a clear tendency. The more connected the board, the worse it is for the top pair, and the more often it should be betting. And there is a very clear outlier on a very well-connected Queen 9-8 board. If we narrow down the selection to only suited boards with the exclusion of Queen 9-8, when we sort by equity, we see the same tendency that we saw in the graph. Well-connected boards with high cards are the worst for top pair and have the highest betting frequency. At the other end of spectrum are disconnected boards with low cards, with higher equity and lower betting frequency. And that's it for this feature. It was a lot of my work. I hope you'll enjoy it. I hope that based on your feedback, we can make it even better. And thanks for watching.